the last day of class. So maybe, oh my goodness, Noella, that was too much of a celebration. I'm going to take that personal. Uh, so it is
I'm just done with the semester.
Oh, I figured that. Yes, it's one of those, the semester seems like you'll have so much time to do everything, and then you get towards the end and it's like, where did the time go? I feel like there's still so much we could be doing, but obviously we don't have infinite time. So all good things must come to an end. So my hope for today is for us to go over any other questions you have about the discussion section. I've had a few emails asking some questions or particulars, so I want to make sure that everyone is on the same page about that and what I'm looking for. We will then have our last lecture of the year, because we did finish chapter, so can I get a reality check? We finished chapter 13, right? The quasi experiments and small ends, small research.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're doing the last chapter, chapter 14, which is how to tie it back to the real world and specifically discuss generalizability, replicability, and the impact, again, of research just at large. And then I'll probably actually, after the discussion section, before we dive into lecture, I'll speak a little bit about the final exam. Okay, so that is the plan for today. So starting with, go ahead.
Sorry. So for the discussion section, I'm looking and I didn't see anywhere to turn it in.
Yeah, so that I'm getting right there, Elizabeth.
Okay. And then for the data set analysis, that's not something, because I was looking at that and I was like, is that what we had? You know what I mean? Is that something we're working on later? Or did I just totally forget about that?
Yeah, no, I'm gonna hide that. That's not something we need. Actually,
okay. I was looking around and I was like,
no, I'm
okay.
I'm in the wrong shell here. I'm moving things around for the other.
So in terms of turning things in, we're going to be working on the discussion.
Yeah, so just give me a moment and I'll go over exactly that. I had a little planned chat about that. So here it is. I want to make sure that you guys can see what it says. Okay. Yeah, see, this was the issue. It had a weird due date. That's why it wasn't popping up. I think I fixed it. Let me share my screen. Oh, hello, Kyle.
Howdy.
All right. This is our Course Connect. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay. So this is what the data analysis, don't worry about that. In the fixed data set, I'll hide that too, just so it's not confusing. But this is where you're going to actually submit your final paper. So I've changed my mind. Instead of you guys submitting your discussion section separately this week, I want you guys to just submit it with your final paper. That makes a lot more sense rather than submitting it separately, which means you get a whole extra week before it needs to be submitted. So hopefully you're like, yay, although it's not that long. So as I mentioned last week, the goal, so as you can see right here, final paper. Do you guys see this? I unhid it. Okay. And I changed the due date. So that is going to be due the last day of next week. So the 30th, which is a Friday. So you need to submit it on the 30th before midnight and you'll be good to go. Okay. So just moving back to the discussion section, last week we discussed in greater detail what are each of the sections you need to discuss. I just want to reiterate again, include the subheadings. That's going to be really helpful. And it is perfectly okay. We did talk about the discussion paper, right? And the link, I just want to make sure I'm not like losing my mind here.
Yeah, we did the discussion sections, like
how-tos.
Yeah, how-tos.
Yeah. Okay. So when you guys get to your limitation, for a lot of you, what's going to be a limitation to determine whether there's statistical significance is because your sample size did not have equal groups. So for instance, if you were curious as to patterns of sleep and how that differed between men and women, if your female population or within your sample, if that N was like 55 and then males was like 12. Those are really uneven groups and they're really tiny. So we can't adequately compare them to arrive at statistical significance. So my recommendation to you is to include a sentence about that in the limitation if you feel like that's another limitation. We've gone through several now altogether. And then the last piece that maybe I did not emphasize enough last week is at the tail end of your discussion, you will need to have a concluding paragraph. I think I talked about it briefly, but I just want to reiterate it again. And your concluding paragraph is going to be essentially like if your grandma said, oh, what'd you learn in research methods? You'd be like, here, this is what I did. So I was interested in the sleep patterns of athletes versus non-athletes. I gave out surveys to Aquinas students. They had to be registered students. They completed a short survey about their sleep patterns and how rested they felt. We found overall that on average, athletes got 6 hours of sleep versus non-athletes who got 8. And in the future, we could look at research of equal groups so we could really test the significance. Okay, so do you see how I just, from a made up study here,
Yeah.
8 sentences of conclusion where you're wrapping it all up together. Okay, you're stating what was your research question, what were you interested in? You're stating who you polled, right? Like who did you survey? Who completed your questionnaire? What were the results or what was the survey? Talk a little bit about that too. And again, in a one sentence, what were your results? What does that mean? What would you do next? So really like 6 to 7 sentences is really all that you need in your concluding paragraph. Okay. Questions about that?
Nope. Sounds good.
Okay. So just to, again, bring it all home, when you submit your paper, you need to submit all the sections you've done thus far. So it's going to start with your title page. Next would be the literature review. Next is methods. Bless you.
Thank you.
Next will be results, then discussion, and lastly, your references. So for the most part, it's in the order that we've submitted it, except references. We submitted references first. Now references are at the end, which is where they belong, right?
Absolutely.
So I just have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Nora.
So do we need to include an abstract? I know we never submitted an abstract section, but
So great question. I was talking about this very topic with another student from my other section who was like, I was really excited to write an abstract. And I'm like, I don't want to take that away from you. You want to write an abstract, you go right ahead. I am not requiring an abstract. So it's totally up to you. If you really are like, I was looking forward to that experience, you knock yourself off and get it done. That's totally fine, but it's not a required portion.
okay, I just wasn't sure if that was going to be something that we were graded on. Like,
Yeah,
put it
no,
there.
very fair question. Very fair question. Yeah, no. At this, I find it to not be a useful use of your time, especially busy time at the end of the semester. For such a small practice study, an abstract writing is not. I would much rather you spend your time writing a strong conclusion that shows you can succinctly bring everything back together to describe what your study was about.
All right, thank you.
No problem. Other questions?
How long should our discussion
Mm-hmm.
be?
So I suck at those questions, McKenna, because I'm not the kind of professor who's going to be like, oh man, she only had 2.25 pages and I asked for 3, like I'm not counting. So really, as long as you have covered the subheadings that I detailed in lecture last week, where you're going to describe your findings, make sure that you focus also on any unexpected finding, right? Like don't just push that under the rug and go, I'm not going to pay attention to that. Make sure you highlight that. Make sure you discuss limitation and then future research and lastly, a conclusion. The goal is to hit all of that. Each of you have different lengths surveys. So it's going to vary, just inherently it's going to vary. The beginning of your explanation of results should be a sentence or two about the demographics, right? So, and you can combine that. You could say our sample had 58 females, and 12 males, and 3 people who are in the non-binary category. You can even put the percentages afterwards. This was surprising since the overall population of Aquinas does not mirror these percentages. Nevertheless, we plugged ahead. The average age is 20.32 years of age, and most students lived off campus, 65% off campus, 35% on campus. I'm making up numbers here, but you can kind of detail the demographics first. So that can be a paragraph. And then after that, dive into the meaning of what you found. So I'm not helpful here in terms of length. It will be shorter than your literature review, but it'll be longer than your methods section.
Okay.
But ultimately, do not worry about length, I guess is the bottom line of my, the take home message. Don't worry about length. Don't be like, I need to add 4 more sentences so I can get to the, like, no, I'm not paying attention to that. As long as you've got all the subheadings and you've got the meat in there. Now, if some of you just write in, and the demographics where we had 12 females and 13 males, and well, there's a problem there, right? Like there's a lot more data that you didn't talk about. As long as you talk about it, it's fine.
So the subheadings were what you just went over.
Yeah, so you just asked that. So remember,
I think I answered it, right? The only because we didn't, you said that or I don't know, but references to previous research we don't have to do because that's too extensive, correct?
yeah. Yep. So those are good subheadings. I might actually, so what I was just saying a minute ago, so it'd be explanation, I'll write it down, of results, and I would include unexpected results, right? Okay. Limitations and future research. Okay, so these should be your headings, and Kyle's not wrong. That's how it's laid out here in terms of the content. I'm just not, I prefer the way if you look on that article I linked under organization and structure, which is right below the section that Kyle referenced. It talks about, the first 4, that's really your description of findings. Step 5 is unexpected findings. Step 6 is limitations. Step 7 is future research. So I would
Thank
say,
you.
does that help?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Awesome.
For the unexpected results, is it okay if we do tie it back to some like stats in the lit review?
Absolutely. Okay, hold on. Who asked that? Was that Ashley?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, totally fine. I am not requiring that you tie it back to the literature, but that is an even stronger discussion. I think because of our research is so small, to have you guys go back to the literature seems like a very large undertaking. So that's why I'm not requiring it. But if you do it, that's great. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right, my hair is still really, really wet and it's bugging me. So we're just gonna do this. All right. So,
Also, sorry to interrupt you before we dive in. Did you guys
Yeah.
see that it was snowing like a lot today? Like
You-
in
you
random parts
missed-
of Michigan?
you missed that part of the conversation at the start of
Oh,
class. I was
okay.
walking my dogs and I was like, look at all this pollen falling. My brain was in such denial. I couldn't see it for what it was.
I can appreciate that because I did the same.
Yeah,
I was like, holy crap, this is April.
it's not cool. All right, so I want to talk also about the final exam, as I'm sure you guys are curious about. So again, hopefully by now, as we're the last week of class, you have figured out I'm not huge into memorization and like, what is the definite, I don't like that. To me, this is a successful class if you are able to apply material you've learned, okay? So this is gonna be a high application exam. something like, you are interested in studying pattern A. Design a study showing a repeated measure to measure pattern A, right? So you need to show me through your writing, what would that look like to do a study with a repeated measure? So if you grasp and understand that concept, that'll come fairly easily. If you don't, obviously, this is an online, test. So no one's watching to see if you're looking at resources. So I fully expect you guys will be looking at resources, which is why I've taken away the time limit. In the past, I was giving students really just an hour and a half to complete the exam. Because in a classroom environment, that was more than enough for people to complete it. I am discovering, though, it's taking folks a lot longer, again, in an online environment because you have access to everything. And so you guys tend to second guess yourselves a lot more and go, well, I think it's that. But let me go look. And then we spend 20 minutes digging through, articles or your textbook or trying to find, the lecture where I talked about that. So because of that, there is no time limit. And in fact, I'm going to have the exam be live next week, Wednesday at probably 7 a.m. I'll just make it accessible so you guys can get it. And you will need to make sure it is submitted by midnight that night. So that is the 28th of April. It's going to go live early in the morning. We are not going to meet together as a class. I'm letting you guys take the reins as to when you want to take the exam. So it's not going to start specifically at 1. I'll have it open earlier in the day. But you need to make sure that it's submitted by midnight on Course Connect. Okay. And the content of the exam, I mean, inherently it is a little bit cumulative, right? So we've talked already, let's say, about ethics. That was something that we tested on already in the first exam. But it's not like now, well, we don't look at ethics because that, that was last, it's kind of interwoven in there. But I'm not going to dig back up concepts, that are more esoteric and not covered in these later chapters. So questions about the exam?
Not questions. It's just kind of finally sitting in there. This is our last class. I'm getting sad.
I know. Again, you missed that. I was like, you guys, the last class. And then Noella was like, woo! And I was like, and I took it personal. So I know it is the last class. So yeah, this semester went slow in parts, and semester I'll remember, I'm like, that's the one where poor Dr. Crickshanks was very worried that I was not going to get through COVID well, because he had it really, really bad. And he was like, I cannot teach your class. So yeah, but no, it worked out. Yep. And you're welcome, Elizabeth. Yeah. The whole goal of the exam, I hated that when I was in grad school and undergrad. Like, you're so stressed out because you don't know what it's about. Again, if you can figure out the concepts, everything, are we going to have questions about validity and reliability, considering we've talked about it almost every single week? Yes. Right. Know what it means, know what they are, know where they're located so you can access it easily in your textbook. Are we going to see how are you understanding these graphs? I'm like, some of the things we keep going over again, it's like beating you with a hammer over the head. Yes, those are going to be on the exam, but not in terms of define. Again, it'll be apply. Okay. All right. Any other questions or? Pretty much it? Okay. So we are going to go over the last chapter of the book. Here it is. Okay. Do you guys see it big or little?
Big.
Big. Okay, good. Last day of class, still having technical difficulties. That's classic Dr. Woltel. All right. So the goal today is to bring in all of the research we've done, every concept we've learned, and really ask the question, how does this apply to the real world? And so 2 big key points are going to be discussed, which is replicability and generalization. If a study is published, okay, let me give you an example, comes out and says, if you we did the study on 1,000 people, and if they wore the color black, they made on average $25,000 less than people who wore regular colors. You might go, what? What are some questions you would ask?
Where they like where what was their sample size?
Okay, good.
Where did they look for these things?
Okay, good. Other questions pop up. And usually if we were having class like in person, I bring donuts last day of class. So I had to get myself a sweet. So I've got a cookie. Sadly, none of you do. Go get a snack if you want.
I think I have a snickerdoodle cookie.
There you go.
Sorry,
right.
I was like coughing and sneezing. Could you repeat the question?
I love it, Elizabeth. Yep. So you read the study, right? And it says we we studied over 1,000 people and discovered that people who wore the color black, right, clothing, made on average about $25,000 less than others. What might be some questions you have about a study that gets published that way? So Kyle talked about who was your sample, where'd you get them from?
Way more like variables in terms of were women wearing those clothes? Were men wearing those clothes? How
Okay.
old were they? Yeah.
Right. And then you might go, I might want to run this study again, right? So if somebody said, oh, well, we ran that study.
Like a
picked-
Tuesday?
What's that?
Yeah, like if it was very random, like, oh, it was just Tuesday where Mike, Lisa, and Amy were all wearing black for some reason when we interviewed them.
Right. Or let's say your sampling was a sampling of convenience, right? At a Starbucks that was right next to this hedge fund manager company, right? I just picked a random like job that I think makes a lot of money, and a community college, right? So now you've got groupings of people, right, that are going to be maybe very disparate in terms of socioeconomic status. And then you look at what they're wearing, but there's also maybe a disparity in age and demographic variables too. So maybe you go, well, let's see if this holds true if we were to run this study again, but I change my location of recruitment, right? And pick something else altogether. That would be replicating the study. And the question comes with that because you see something that's brand new that maybe is against past studies or new concept, right? Or looking at the interaction between two variables that had never been looked at before. So in order for it to show strong validity, we want to replicate the study to see if we come up with the same findings, okay? So taking a step back to ethics, right? Remember the seminal article that we discussed with vaccination and autism. Do you guys remember that conversation?
Yeah.
Okay. Massive, right? Like finding. He put these findings out there. What did the scientific community do?
They took the scientific community. I think they were kind of overshadowed by the mobs of people who took that one false study and ran with it.
Well, and so you're absolutely right with that, Elizabeth. But if we were to like go a little bit further back, right? Imagine, and I forget his name now, I could probably dig it up, but he publishes this paper, right? Fellow researchers in lines of genetic and cognitive development and like pediatric medicine, right? All interested parties are reading this article. What might they have wanted to do?
Retest.
Retest, right? Like, whoa, you found this link that no one else has found before. That's incredible. If that's true, we need more data, right? Because before we stop and say, probably the same thing with like cigarette research, right? Maybe people start developing lung cancer, but before you go, wait, is it actually the cigarettes? You know, you want to do some testing to figure that out and see, is it just a few individuals that maybe were predisposed? Maybe there's something else going on, or is it generalizable? So then you do studies. So that's exactly what they did. So researchers that had vested interest in pediatrics again, or, immunology ran some additional studies. And what did they find?
Nothing. No, nothing.
Right. They could not replicate the results of the scientist. Okay. Which, when that happens, you got to ask yourselves a few questions. And again, we'll talk about this all again, but this is the precursor. First question is it sample dependent, right? Is there something about this sample that's so idiosyncratic that it is not generalizable, which is a problem, right? Because then it's really more of a case study than true research that's being disseminated out into the large public. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, if I cannot replicate the data, it's going to make me question how you got this data, right? So then they probably wanted to see his actual raw data. Can you let us observe that so we can have a better sense as to how you arrived at these conclusions, right? That is also something we'll talk about later, is pulling past data or historical data and using it for like a meta-analysis. So it's looking at, well, anyway, I'm getting way too excited about this topic. So
Well, okay, just to continue, I bring up this whole like anti-vaccine like to my everyone I know. I'm like, did you know that it all started from one fake paper, and everything starts, and it's fun. It's easy to dive into.
well, and the good part is that it's all available, right? So if somebody goes, no, that doesn't, I mean, I love that. Just bring it, because I am so data driven as a person and so research based. So I'm not going to tell you something and not have a way to back it up. I'm like, totally, please Google it. Let's look at it together and let's read that, because I want to make sure you understand this. This was no joke. And I hope she never watches my slides, but this was the conversation with my mother just a couple days ago. I'm like, this is everything I stand for. Come look at this research. No, I don't think that's real. I'm like, anyway, we don't need to, this does not need to be a therapy session. Yeah, but this is very true, right? The data is all out there. It is public knowledge. You can access it. It's been redacted by the Journal of Medicine. There's been, I mean, I think he lost his license. I mean, it was very impactful, right? Now, and we talked about this in our ethics chapter, but this happens. Fabrication of data or inappropriate discussion or interpretation of data to skew towards your hypothesis, all of those are ethical violations. So I mean, this was complete fabrication. So that's no bueno, right? Not doing that. But this is why the body of research is so important, so that you can publish some data. And obviously, I could publish an article right now on the internet on drjuliewoltelsays.com about how this cup of coffee might, has changed my life. That's probably valid. Coffee does change my life on a daily basis, but some random thing like, and then I breathed later and killed the plant. And so is Starbucks killing your plants? I could come up with all sorts of nonsense and post it on the internet. The internet is free for all. Journal articles, however, are not. They are peer reviewed and they are subject to replication, right? So if it does not, in fact, show consistency through replication, it puts into question the results that were received. So, all right. Again, for studies to be important, they must be replicable, meaning another researcher can take very similar sample, similar methodology, and they should arrive at a similar conclusion in terms of their results. And again, to be important, the question is, does it need to have external validity? So this is more of a question. External validity meaning, does it generalize out to every man and woman? Okay. There are going to be some studies. We just finished talking about quasi experiments. Do they all generalize to every man and woman?
No.
They do not, right? If I'm doing split brain research, I fully recognize that is not going to apply to most adults in the United States or whatever, my population of interest. But you got to go, who am I studying? And does that apply maybe to that specific group? Okay, so we'll talk about some of the pitfalls in our general research here too in the US. Okay, so the idea of replicability or replication is that it's reproducible. So you can reproduce the results. It does not mean that the study has to be replicated identically, but that the results have been repeated somewhere in the world through studies, okay? So that is hugely important. A meta-analysis is a review of just that. If you are interested in seeing the research on cognitive behavioral therapy, on treating depressive symptoms, right? I'm picking two things that there's tons of data on there, right? You could pull every single study in the last 10 years that has been done on those two topics, and that would be a meta-analysis. So you are looking at multiple articles and seeing how are their findings similar and how are they different. Was there something unique about their sampling? Was there something unique about the therapeutic approach? What did the literature say, in other words? And again, replicability in the popular press. This is huge because if you think about random news articles that come out either on TV or in magazines, like next up, researcher shows that your dog could kill you, you know, like these kind of statements. And it's based on research. Well, okay, first off, there's problems there, right? Because they usually just give you a tiny snippet and it's not the full view. But you want to make sure that there's still replicability in that popular press as well. Okay, so what are replication studies? It's when a researcher performs a study again, right? It should not be too challenging to understand. So a direct replication is the exact same methodology was done. If you're doing a conceptual replication, you're taking the same concepts or maybe two constructs together to evaluate their relationship, but perhaps your methodology has been changed slightly, okay? A replication plus extension would be same method, but you're adding a variable, okay? There's one more variable you're looking at to take a peek at. And replications can and should be done by independent researchers, okay? It's okay for a, and you'll see this often, if you see a researcher, oh, shoot. Can you guys hear there's like an echo?
Yeah.
Just for a sec there.
Is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay. It got real loud. So if you see a researcher talk about a pilot study, that is a form of like a mini replication, right? So they tested it out with a smaller sample size to see how their methodology or survey instrument performed, still in an experimental setting, but again, in a smaller rate. So when they do a pilot study like that, then they can compare the results from their pilot study to the final study and see how closely aligned they are. That's a form of replication that's within an experiment by the same researcher. But ideally, replication studies should be done by independent researchers. So someone else who doesn't have a vested interest or is not looking to gain greater clout by just redoing the same thing. Because again, is there a problem by redoing the same study over and over again, same people all the time? Like, what would be the benefit in doing that?
You would know, like you could determine if it was like a solid fact or if it's like, this is it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's definitely true. Like with the idea of replication, you're able to really fine tune the relationship between constructs. But if the same researcher at a university every single year ran the same study with freshmen, because that's what he had access to, at one point you might want to go, give it a rest. We've already shown that this is true, right? We want an independent person who's not having a vested interest that this is your special thing to show that that's true at a different university, or that's, you know what I mean? So the independent researcher piece is important as well.
No, so question, are there companies that are just dedicated to doing this?
No, it's not usually company based. It's usually researchers within a certain area of academia who have shared interest. And so as news articles or research articles are coming out, then they go, it usually starts with that, like, this is an interesting finding. I wonder if I could replicate this here. So then they will work in conjunction with the original researcher by saying, I'm doing a replication of your study. I'm curious to see if this applies in my specific sample. Also, I'm going to add one more instrument because yours was super interesting. I just want to add this variable to see if that is still linked, right? And so then they could publish it on their own. So it's not
Okay.
usually a big company. Now, having said that, in biomedical research, they may very well, like pharmaceutical companies, may run experiments over and over again to ensure that their specific drug is having the same impact on a variety of samples. So maybe, but usually it's just independent researchers.
Oh,
All right, so direct replication. That means, again, you are doing the exact same thing as you did in the first study. This is an article that was published in 2004. They theorized that because most people like themselves, that they might implicitly associate positive feelings with the letters in their own name and the numbers in their birthday. Again, this is kind of an odd one. Definitely the names, that's something that's been shown as also like sales technique. Using someone's name makes people feel good. Hearing their own name is a pleasant sound to people's ears. And then furthermore, they hypothesized that people might be more attracted to people who share their name, birthdays, or initials. So out of curiosity, do you guys know a lot of people with the same name as you? Like I'm thinking, for instance, like Noella and Narelle. Do you guys have a lot of people you've met in your life that have the same name as you?
I've never met anybody with my name.
Yeah, I was thinking Narelle. I've never heard that name either. So maybe that hasn't connected as much. And anybody else, you're like, I have never met anybody by my name.
Well, for
I've
me,
met people with my name, but just like not spelt the same.
Okay, wait, and I couldn't see who that was.
McKenna.
McKenna. That is the only way my brain can spell McKenna, is the way I'm looking at it right now. What is the other way?
McKenna.
Oh. And you know what I think about that? I just think of a last name if it's MCK. Interesting.
Yeah, that's how like when I go to like stores and stuff, that's how they always spell it. No one ever spells it right.
Oh, that is the classic way, right? When you go to Starbucks, how do they write your name? That's how you know
Yep.
what your name is. Was there another comment? Noella, did you want to say something?
yeah, for me, not so much in United States, but in my home country, it's very popular.
Okay. And it's spelled like this with the W.
Oh, there's a lot of way to spell it. Like
Mhm.
you can just take out the W and just use 2L.
That's so, I'm from Montreal, Canada, and I've heard the name Noella, but usually without the W, it's Noella.
Yeah, it still sounds kind of similar, like nowhere.
Yeah, because the word
My-
Noel is Christmas in French. Yeah. Very cool. All right, let's see. Any other names that Mary Pat, do you know a lot of people with your name?
No, I've never met anybody with like both parts of my name. Obviously, there's a lot of Marys and obviously there's a lot of Pats, but like
Yeah.
nobody with both of them.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's interesting. So this theory that they have that you would be more prone to liking somebody of your same name. And does anybody go like, oh no, I knew this person with my same name. They were a total jerk.
me.
You.
I've run into only like every time like Kyle. I maybe it's because I like ran into one in third grade and he like pushed me down on the playground. Ever since then, it's this negative connotation. I'm like,
Oh, bad.
Kyle? Oh yeah, he's probably a mean guy. I'm like, oh shit, that's my name.
I feel like Kyle's like a frat guy name too.
See, we have a stigma.
See, so I don't know any adult. No, I do. I do know a Kyle as an adult. He's not a nice human.
Yep.
And he's a pastor. I mean, these things, I'm like, that's a double whammy. Yeah. Otherwise, I just know little kiddos named Kyle. No, delightful. So, all right. So that's what these researchers were after, right? They wanted to know if there would be kind of this predisposition or this inclination towards making a positive connection with somebody based on the similarity, again, of their names, birthday, and then, or even initials. So to test this, the participants completed a short survey about themselves. Then each participant was given the page of response from a randomly selected partner. At the top of the page was the partner's ID number printed in large font. Now, for half of the participants, the partner's ID number had been matched to their own birthdays, okay? So you're getting this, random survey response, but the participant ID is actually your birthday, okay? For the other half of the participant, it was not, it was just randomized numbers. So the other information on the partner response was identical. So the only difference was whether the ID matched the birthday or did not. After several minutes, the matched birthday, the participants were asked to rate their partner on different dimensions. As you can see in this graph over here, they ended up liking the partner more when they had the ID numbers that match than when it did not match, okay? So you could see here, the birthday match, right? Much higher than the control group, which is just a randomized number. Now, this study was replicated in this study 5B, right? And although the direct replication makes a lot of sense, you run the risk of repeating the threats to internal validity or construct validity when it is a direct replication. So sometimes they'll turn to other forms of replication instead of direct replication, which would be like a concept replication or direct replication plus variable, okay? So this is one of those examples of a direct replication. When you're doing a conceptual replication, you use different procedures or different methodology to access the same research question, okay? So at the conceptual level, here are the two concepts we're looking at. So if you're trying to measure the amount that you've consumed, that's the dependent variable. Your independent variable conceptually is the serving container size, right? Whether it's small or large. So here, there's different ways or operational levels that you could do that. So one is using the bowl. I mean, this is back to our pasta example. I don't know if you guys remember that. But you could do a small or large bowl, a small or large box, or it could be a bottle size, small or large. But again, that's what you're manipulating, right? Like what is the container by which you are consuming? And then we're going to have two levels, small and large and all. And then depending on what it is you're interested in, what's the item that could be measured, you have multiple options again. The number of chips that you ate, the ounce of popcorn that were eaten, or oil that was used while cooking. So again, by doing a conceptual replication, you're getting at the crux of the same concept, just measuring it slightly differently. So that if somehow there was a threat to internal validity, again, with our pasta example, we came up with a lot of different ideas. Was the time of day? Was the pasta the same? Did you have a group of participants that were like, I'm not eating that? Like in this, if I see popcorn, the first thing that comes to my mind is my own experience hosting my daughter's 10-year birthday party, like 3 years ago now, where I was like, we're going to do a movie and popcorn. And half the kids were like, we don't like popcorn. I was like, what? How's this a thing? Well, half of them had either just had braces or had braces on. So popcorn was not an allowable food. This thing I hadn't even considered, right? So that would be a threat to the validity on how much they consumed if I decided to use that as part of my experiment. So having multiple operational levels allows to limit, again, that internal validity. Okay.
Okay, just a quick question. What
Yeah.
was their snack of choice during the movie? No popcorn? Like Twizzlers?
No, I offered potato chips
Okay.
and that worked. Although one of them was like, oh, those are Cape Cods. Yeah, we don't eat that. And I was like, then you can have nothing if you're going to be judgy about my chips. Cape Cod, come on, that's fine.
Yeah,
All
they're
right.
crunchier. I like them.
All right, this is replication plus extension. So you replicate the original study, but you add some variable to test additional questions, okay? So this would be how often you have collided in a motor vehicle accident. Okay, let me back it up. This is based on the same study we looked at, the cell phone use. Remember, maybe we did that 2-3 weeks ago. It's cell phone use and driving. That was the study in 2004. So they started by studying college students and found that they drove worse when talking on a cell phone. Then they conducted another study with the same procedures, but they tested both college students and older adults. And remember, that's when we discovered that age had an impact, right? Okay. So that was a replication right there, plus extension. So they replicated the same study with the college students, but then they also included another group that was of older adults. So that was a replication plus adding the variable of age. Okay. But you can also add a new situational variable. And in this case, that's what they did. They added a degree of practice as a situational variable. So remember again, this is not actually driving. This is like a simulation, like in a Dave and Buster's, like fake car driving simulation. And remember again, the phone was not even like on their ear, it was hands-free. So they added practice as a situational variable. So on day one, participants had no practice. They just did their run and then they measured their braking response. And on day 4, obviously, they'd had 4 days of practice because they had started day 1. So the results of the replication plus extension with that specific situational variable is shown right here between the two. So by day 4, you can see that they've improved, right? There's less collision, their driving has improved, but there is still a discrepancy whether they're on a cell phone or not, meaning they are driving worse, even with this improvement here, they're still worse off with the practice if they're on their cell phones. Okay, does this make sense?
Yeah, the only thing that so collision frequency is at 25 for driving with or while on cell phone on day 1. That just seems really high.
Well,
25
so
collisions.
again,
I know Dave and Buster's.
right, and I struggle driving those things. I'm always like, oh, I'm overcorrecting. So the collision is not that you break the game, game over, but it could just be you went off the road, or we'd have to dig into that specific study and see how they measured a collision specifically. But my thinking is if you just hit the guardrail or any of that, that's counted as a collision.
Okay, that makes sense.
Which then that number seems very realistic. to me.
Good, yeah.
I
Yeah,
just played Mario Kart, I think that's what it is, on the Nintendo Switch with my kids. I was going backwards, like, Mom, do you even have a driver's license? I'm like, yes, it's much easier than this stupid game. I don't get it. All right, so they did another replication plus extension study when they compared 3 driving conditions. The first one was driving alone, driving while talking on a cell phone, and driving drunk. So your baseline is kind of equivalent to here. There's the driving only, and they're just driving by themselves. The next one is driving while using their cell phone. And the third one is driving with a blood alcohol level of 0.08 or greater. Okay. So this is the braking onset time. This is what we were looking at, I think, a few weeks ago. So interestingly, well, let me not tell you. You tell me. What do you notice about this graph?
Well, the baseline for the braking onset time is the same as driving with a blood alcohol, driving drunk.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just interesting in itself. And then driving while on the phone is just completely higher than all of that. I know this is in milliseconds, but it is.
Is it surprising to you guys that the cell phone would be more distracting than driving inebriated?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, that surprises me.
Yeah. This is not a plug to say, if you're going to drive with a cell phone, might as well be drunk. That is not what the study is saying. So let's just make sure we're not, reading that into it. But yes, obviously driving while on your cell phone is very impactful as to how long it takes you to brake. This next one is braking force. So how hard you end up pushing on the pedal to come to a stop. And again, we see that, well, what do you see? Keep wanting to give you the answers.
Well, I have a question. You said like the one with the cell phone was different than the one with the driving with alcohol level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would it be like because of when you're drunk, you mostly like it to pay attention not to get caught because you have alcohol?
Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
Whereas the other one, you're actually like using your cell phone while driving. So you do pay attention, but a lot of times between driving and the cell phone.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you're definitely onto something here, Noella, because if you look at the next graph, that's how hard they press on the brake. Who presses the hardest?
The phone.
The drunk drivers, right? They press with the most force. So I think they are a little bit on edge, and they tend to brake quickly and they brake fast, which means it's going to be this kind of, you know, driving that's just really delightful to drive with. So yeah, more of a panicky sense to it. Good. All right. So replications by independent researchers. So there is more weight that is given to replication studies when they are conducted by independent researchers instead of in the lab of the original experimenter. That's just, you know, the fact that someone else can replicate a similar concept, methodology, and result holds more weight than the same researcher saying, I'm going to press redo and do the study all over again. When a finding cannot be replicated in a different lab, though, it brings into question whether the original result can be obtained under just very specific condition. This goes back to our original conversation, right? If I cannot match up these results, that's making me curious as to why that is. Is there something about my methodology or my sampling that is different than yours? Or are your results so highly specific that they are only valid for your specific sample and no one else? And then obviously that shows that the findings are quite fragile, right? Like they're just really unique and idiosyncratic to that group. Okay.
Oh my, I'm sorry, I'm distracted. Your cat is right behind you. She's very cute.
My cat is?
Yeah, she's right behind you.
Oh my gosh, she is. That, so I can't,
Oh,
can you guys see her?
yeah.
I can't, my
Yeah,
name is
now I
right there in
can.
front of it.
Geez, good eye.
Oh, she's so cute.
She's just here terrorizing the dog is really what she's doing. Oh, and now someone's jealous. Uh-oh, we've got two jealous ones now. What are we gonna do with that? They can't see you.
Oh.
They say, why are we awake? Oh, see, now it's about to get real.
Oh. She's like,
No,
I'm out.
I'm gone. I'm gonna go. The dog's awake. Nothing good comes out of this. She never comes to see me. She's very much my husband's cat. She's like, you're a dog person. I don't like you. All right. I thought you were making a noise because you wanted me to go back to the slide, but I think we're good. Yeah. All right. So the importance and the weight of evidence. So a single study is only important if it can be replicated, because again, otherwise, what is it? It's a case study. It's an interesting fun fact. It's a personal experience, right? It's all the things from the start of the semester that I was like, nope, that is not research. If it can only be done once on one particular group, then it is just really unique to that group and is not actually research. Okay. Even statistically significant results have to be replicated. Okay. Why is that? Why is it important? What do we think?
Well, if something's replicated and able to be done multiple times by different people, it shows that whatever the study is, whatever they're trying to prove, has validity in regards of, hey, this is actually what like is a thing we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, statistical significance means that in this particular sample, we have shown that the difference we're seeing between our groups is large enough that it's not due to random chance, right? But if it cannot be replicated, then there may be something unique about that original sample that does not apply to other groups, okay? And the most important part is that science progresses through replication of studies, especially once you start doing replication with adding a variable, with an extension, right? Because you're replicating it, you're saying, yep, I've done this. Now I'm going to take it to the next level and see what happens. All right, now, of course, they need to go out. All right, go out in the sun and the snow. Okay. And then every time you replicate a study, researchers will look at the results and go, next time for future research, here's what should be done, A, B, or C, right? So that future studies portion that you guys will need to write about in the discussion section is also telling the academic and research community, this is where I think this topic needs to go next. And so if they replicate your study and then they add that next thing, that's moving the wheel forward. And then with each researcher, then you take the research further. Okay, this is a very small slide. I don't know if you guys can see this. This is just another interesting idea that's going on with all the replication. So the replication crisis is what this is titled. And this refers back to journals who prefer to publish new methods, new theories, rather than direct replications, okay? So early replication attempts inspires large groups of psychologists known as the open science collaboration to attempt a replication on a larger systematic scale. So that group is more what you were thinking about earlier, Kyle, like, is that like a group of people who just replicate studies? They're pushing for that. So they selected 100 studies from 3 major journals and recruited researchers around the world to conduct direct replications. They used different metrics to judge whether a study was a successful replication. By one metric, only 39% of the studies had clearly replicated the original effects. Other measures yielded better rates of replication, but the media usually reported the lowest, which happened to be 39%. The announcement was alarming, obviously. It's like we have this group of people who are going to push towards replication, and we're only finding 39% that are actually good replications. That's problematic. So science writers dubbed this problem a replication crisis, and in the months that follows, scientists began to analyze the situation, okay? So they came up with several reasons as to why there were problems in how the replication was done. Now, again, this is part of our nature as human. We like the new and shiny object, right? So journals, they're the same. They don't want to keep publishing replication after replication. That's not exciting to them. They want new findings. They want something exciting and new to push the research forward. So this is why this particular group moved ahead and really solicited for experimenters and researchers to do more replication, okay? So there's kind of 3 different areas that they identified in terms of, you know, like what is the possible problem? And I dive into some of these a little bit more in this other one here. So contextually sensitive effects specific to the lab group. So some of the measures and manipulation that were used in replication may not have had the same meaning as in the original published article. Some of the original effects are contextually sensitive, and when the replication context is too different, some authors argue that the replication is more likely to fail, okay? So this is one of the example. This was in 2016, and then again replicated later on by a different group later in 2016. In one original study of how people respond to charitable appeals, the original study mailed actual letters about an AIDS-related charity, but the replication sent emails instead, and they were about an environmental charity. Okay, so 2 major change, right? Method of delivery, one is actually like letters, the other one's email. The other one is about an AIDS-related charity, the other one's an environmental charity. Okay, what do we think? Why would that lead to a difference?
Like, especially with the AIDS versus environmental is more of a global aspect of like, hey, like this is kind of just being good as a person. Like if anyone recycles, that's just kind of like gets lumped together. But like AIDS, if you and your family don't specifically know someone that suffers from AIDS, they might not care as much. And so that could just be like, oh, well, kind of just throw that letter away. Oh, but this email about saving the world, boom, boom.
Right. Well, and I suppose it's probably a good thing that it was an email and not a letter to an environmental group,
Yes.
but yes. I mean, so with a charitable donation, right? Like people will have their own biases as to where they want to give their money, specifically if it's a cause that they are not as linked to or care about as much, they can easily dismiss it, right? So again, this was a replication of, but a conceptual replication, right? So there were some changes in the methodology which led to vast difference. Is it because the original study was faulty or too precise on its sampling? I'm not sure. I think that's a big enough difference in terms of the conceptual change and the methodology that it may in fact just be that the replication is part of the error. Okay. They have another example of this. So there's another original study that had Stanford University students watch a video about diversity related admission practices. The replication used the same video in the Netherlands where the university system differs. Problems with that?
First thing, different cultural norms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, diversity related admission practices, we know this is an issue in the US. It's not an issue, at least based on this, in the Netherlands, right? Their admission process is very, very different. So are they going to have a different view about it after watching this video? I would also say language probably plays a role. If it's the same video in English and you have some non-native speakers, that may present as a challenge, okay? The second major issue is the number of replication attempts, right? You can't say one and done. Oh, we didn't replicate it. We call for faulty research. There needs to be a body of literature where there's been a replication that's taken place multiple times to either really strengthen the validity of the study or pose questions and make some changes because of it, okay? And lastly, there could be problems with the original study, right? Oftentimes a replication, this goes back to our original discussion with the vaccination and autism, replication allows to see if there's original problems with the first study. So in certain cases, the original study sample size was too small, so a few extreme individuals could have disproportionately influenced the means and patterns of their behavior. In large samples, extreme cases almost certainly are canceled out by individuals that are at the opposite extreme, right? That's the benefit of a larger sample size, is that your tails end up reverting back towards the mean. So they're equally, discounted, so to speak. But that's not the case in small samples. So they can lead to findings that cannot be replicated because there isn't actually a real effect in the first place. So that's the first issue here with sample size. The second one is harking. So this is the term that stands for hypothesizing after the results are known. This is why for your specific study, what were you told to do? First, you had to write out your hypothesis before you gathered your data, right? That seems like a, well, duh moment, right? But oftentimes in the world of research, it'll happen the other way around. Yeah. And then p-hacking is the other big piece. By p-hacking, I mean, that's in relation to the p-value, right? When you find something that's statistically significant. So a researcher might peek at the study's result, and if they're not quite significant, run a few more individuals and decide to remove certain outliers from the data or run a different type of analysis altogether, okay? So then you're manipulating data to actually get a statistically significant result, which that's not a good idea. We don't do that, okay? Do you guys mind if we take like a let's make it till 2:15 break?
Yep.
Okay. Let's
Can
come
do.
right back at 2:15 because my dog is about to like destroy our neighbor, keeps barking and it's driving me bananas. And yeah, let's come back at 2:15.
2:15.
Bye.